Have you ever wondered why the person you claim to love completely ignores you precisely when you need them most? Picture this scenario. You've just received life-changing news and instinctively seek their gaze, yet they look away and shift the conversation elsewhere. Your heart sinks, but they act as though absolutely nothing has happened. According to Sigmund Freud, such silence never occurs by accident. Behind every missed gesture, every unspoken word, every avoided glance, lies a profound psychological truth that the conscious mind refuses to confront. The unconscious always communicates, even when lips remain sealed. Today, you'll discover 6 unmistakable signals that reveal what truly transpires in the mind of someone you love. These aren't merely relationship tips, but psychoanalytic tools that will enable you to decode the hidden patterns of human behavior. If you wish to continue exploring the deepest secrets of the psyche, subscribe to this channel. The first signal you're about to uncover might forever transform how you interpret relationships. The first signal proves devastating in its simplicity. When someone begins systematically avoiding physical contact, they're not simply experiencing a stressful period. They're implementing what Freud termed the defense mechanism of reaction formation. Consider your partner who until yesterday sought spontaneous embraces, now stiffening when you touch them. They appear perpetually busy when you approach, finding excuses to leave the couch when you sit beside them. This behavior doesn't stem from diminished love, but from its opposite, an excess of emotional intensity that the unconscious perceives as dangerous. Freud discovered that when our feelings become too intense to manage consciously, the psyche activates a paradoxical defense. The person begins behaving opposite to what they genuinely desire. Physical proximity, rejection becomes protection against the fear of being overwhelmed by emotional intimacy. It's as if the unconscious declares, "If I don't approach physically, I cannot be hurt emotionally." There's more. This bodily withdrawal often masks an internal struggle between the desire for total fusion and the fear of losing one's identity. The person avoiding your touch is actually fighting against the impulse to surrender completely to you, which the unconscious interprets as a threat to psychological survival. The body, therefore, becomes the battlefield where this conflict unfolds. Every avoided gesture represents a victory of the ego against impulses that seem too perilous to explore. The tragedy is that this defense, born to protect the relationship, ends up damaging it. Recognizing this pattern means understanding that behind every physical rejection often hides a desire too intense to be admitted. It's not about lack of love, but love so profound it becomes frightening. Have you observed this pattern in yourself or your partner? The next signal is even more subtle and concerns how the unconscious manipulates words to conceal the most uncomfortable truth of all. The second signal proves terrifying in its subtlety. When someone obsessively controls you for your own good, they're not expressing love, but discharging repressed aggression they don't dare acknowledge even to themselves. Imagine your partner constantly monitoring your schedule, calling every hour to check if you're okay, discouraging you from seeing certain friends because they're bad for you. They claim it's for protection, and perhaps they genuinely believe it. But Freud would have immediately recognized this pattern. Reaction formation of the aggressive instinct. The human unconscious, according to psychoanalysis, is traversed by aggressive impulses that society teaches us to repress. When these destructive impulses cannot be expressed directly, they find socially acceptable outlets. Control disguised as care is one such outlet. The person protecting you obsessively is actually expressing the unconscious desire to dominate you, limit your freedom, make you dependent. But this truth is too disturbing to be consciously admitted, so the ego transforms it into its opposite. I don't want to control you, I want to protect you. Freud called this mechanism masked sadism. The destructive energy doesn't disappear, but disguises itself as virtue. The result is a form of psychological violence, perceived as love by both the perpetrator and the victim. It's one of the most dangerous traps of the unconscious. The paradox is that the more the person represses their aggressiveness, the more invasive and suffocating it becomes. Every "I love you too much to let you go" conceals an "I need to control you to feel secure." Every "I do this for your good" masks an "I need to feel you powerless to feel powerful." Recognizing this pattern means safeguarding your psychological autonomy. True love encourages the other's freedom. It doesn't limit it. When someone protects you to the point of suffocation, you're witnessing the manifestation of impulses that person lacks the courage to face. Have you ever experienced this type of protection that made you feel caged? The third signal reveals how the unconscious uses jealousy to hide an even deeper truth about one's self-esteem. The third signal is brutal in its truth. When someone obsessively accuses you of betrayal without any real foundation, they're not expressing fear of losing you, but projecting onto you their own unfaithful impulses they cannot accept. Imagine your partner checking your phone, interrogating your friends, interpreting every smile you give a stranger as confirmation of their suspicions. They accuse you of psychological betrayal, of having the look of someone hiding something. And the more you deny, the more convinced they become of being right. This isn't love. It's what Freud called pathological projection. Projection is one of the most primitive defense mechanisms of the human psyche. When we have impulses, desires, or thoughts we consider unacceptable, the unconscious expels them from our awareness and attributes them to others. The obsessively jealous person is actually struggling against their own ghosts of infidelity. Freud observed that often the patients most obsessed with their partner's betrayal were those secretly harboring betrayal fantasies. The unconscious, unable to tolerate this contradiction between conscious moral values and repressed desires, resolves the conflict by projecting these impulses onto the other. The mechanism is diabolical in its effectiveness. By accusing you, the jealous person temporarily frees themselves from the anguish of recognizing their own traitorous impulses. Every denial you make gets interpreted as confirmation because it feeds the vicious cycle of projection. The more you defend yourself, the more convinced they become you're hiding something, because it's exactly what they would do in your place. But there's an even deeper aspect. This pathological jealousy often conceals a form of unconscious self-sabotage. The person accusing you of betrayal is unconsciously seeking to destroy the relationship before being abandoned. It's as if the unconscious prefers the controlled pain of self-destruction to the uncontrollable anguish of abandonment. The tragic part is that this dynamic creates exactly what it fears. It pushes the other toward defensive behaviors that can be interpreted as confirmation of suspicions. The prophecy fulfills itself through the very force that sought to prevent it. Have you ever lived in a relationship where you constantly felt on trial for crimes never committed? The fourth signal reveals how the unconscious uses silence as the most devastating weapon of all. The fourth signal is perhaps the cruelest. When someone punishes you with total silence after a conflict, they're not simply processing emotions, but implementing what Freud recognized as passive-aggressive sadism. Imagine having an argument and apologizing sincerely, but the other person continues treating you as if you were invisible. They respond in monosyllables, avoid your gaze, transform every attempt at dialogue into a wall of ice. This behavior isn't a form of self-protection, but a method of psychological torture. Freud discovered that human aggression can manifest as much through violent actions as through deliberate absence of actions. Punitive silence is one of the most refined forms of psychological violence because it allows the aggressor to maintain a facade of innocence. I'm not doing anything wrong, I simply don't feel like talking. But the unconscious knows exactly what it's doing. Silence is used as a control tool because it exploits one of humanity's primary needs: recognition. Denying recognition to someone is equivalent to symbolically denying their existence. It's a form of temporary social death that can be more devastating than any insult. The person using punitive silence is discharging their anger indirectly while maintaining control of the situation. They force you to beg for their attention, to humiliate yourself, to obtain even a nod of recognition. This way, they reverse roles. From the person who made a mistake, they become the one holding power. Freud called this mechanism reversed identification with the aggressor. The person transforms their position of vulnerability into a position of dominance through strategic withdrawal. Silence becomes a more powerful weapon than any word because it activates the primitive anguish of abandonment. The paradox is that this behavior, born from the desire to protect one's dignity, ends up revealing the profound emotional immaturity of whoever implements it. An emotionally mature person faces conflicts through dialogue, not through silent punishment. But there's an even more subtle aspect. Often punitive silence conceals the fear of being vulnerable through words. It's easier to hurt with absence than to risk being hurt with presence. The unconscious prefers the destructive power of silence to the transformative possibility of dialogue. Have you ever suffered this form of silent violence? The next signal reveals how the unconscious distorts memories to protect one's self-image. The fifth signal is terrifying in its pervasiveness. When someone constantly rewrites the history of your relationship, minimizing their own faults and amplifying yours, they're not simply lying, but implementing what Freud called defensive revision of reality. Imagine that after a fight, your partner claims never to have said certain hurtful words you clearly remember, or transforms an episode where they were aggressive into an event where they were just defending themselves from your provocations. These aren't conscious lies, but an unconscious process of memory reconstruction. Freud discovered that human memory isn't a neutral archive, but an active system that selects, modifies, and reorganizes memories according to the psychological needs of the moment. When a memory threatens the image we have of ourselves, the unconscious modifies it to make it compatible with our self-esteem. This process of selective falsification serves to protect what Freud called primary narcissism, the fundamental need to feel good and righteous. If admitting to having made mistakes threatens this image, the unconscious prefers to modify reality rather than modify the concept of self. The mechanism is so subtle that often the person sincerely believes the modified version of events. They're not consciously lying, but have literally rewritten their personal history. Each time they tell the episode, the version distorts further, moving increasingly away from the original truth. But there's an even more insidious aspect. This falsification doesn't only concern the past, but also conditions the present and future. The person who has rewritten their errors as victimizations develops a narrative of themselves as a misunderstood victim, which justifies increasingly problematic behaviors. Freud observed that patients with this pattern often came from families where admitting errors equaled losing love and acceptance. The unconscious learns that emotional survival depends on the ability to maintain an irreproachable self-image, even at the cost of distorting reality. The result is a form of involuntary gaslighting that can make you doubt your own sanity. When someone constantly rewrites events you were both present for, it begins to undermine your trust in your own perception of reality. Recognizing this pattern means protecting your psychological integrity. An emotionally healthy person is capable of admitting their errors without this threatening their fundamental self-esteem. Have you ever felt your reality questioned by someone who remembered events in a completely different way? The last signal is the most devastating because it concerns the deliberate destruction of your emotional reference points. The sixth and final signal is the most devastating in its psychological effectiveness. When someone unpredictably alternates moments of profound intimacy with periods of total detachment, they're not experiencing natural emotional highs and lows, but implementing what Freud recognized as intermittent reinforcement of attachment. Imagine your partner is today the most loving person in the world, dedicating total attention to you, making you feel like the only important person in their life. But tomorrow they become cold, distant, almost annoyed by your presence. Then, when you begin to resign yourself, they reappear with all their warmth. This isn't unstable love, it's unconscious manipulation. Freud, along with his successors, discovered that emotional intermittency creates the most powerful form of psychological dependence. When we don't know when the next emotional gratification will arrive, our brain develops an obsession to obtain it. It's the same mechanism that creates gambling addiction. The uncertainty of reward makes it irresistible. The person alternating intimacy and detachment is unconsciously exploiting this neurobiological vulnerability. During moments of intimacy, they stimulate oxytocin and dopamine production, creating biochemical dependence. During periods of detachment, they activate separation anxiety, which amplifies the desire for reconnection. But there's an even deeper level. This behavior often stems from an unconscious conflict between the need for intimacy and the fear of being devoured by the relationship. The person alternates closeness and distance because they cannot find stable balance between autonomy and connection. Freud called this pattern ambivalence of the love object. The other simultaneously represents salvation and threat, security and danger, completion and annihilation. The only way the unconscious finds to manage this contradiction is alternating the two emotional states. The tragic part is that this behavior creates exactly what it seeks to avoid. Emotional intermittency doesn't protect autonomy, but creates dependence. It doesn't preserve freedom, but generates obsession. It doesn't maintain control, but unleashes uncontrollable dynamics. Those subjected to this treatment develop what psychologists call relational post-traumatic stress syndrome. They live in constant alert, trying to decipher signals to predict the partner's next mood change. Their self-esteem begins depending on the alternation of approval and rejection from the other. Recognizing this pattern means saving your mental health. Authentic love is characterized by emotional stability, not affective roller coasters. A person who truly loves you won't use you as a regulator for their emotional anxieties. Have you ever lived through this alternation that made you feel like walking on emotional hot coals? Now that you know all 6 signals, it's time to integrate this awareness into your life. These aren't simply problematic behaviors, but windows into the human unconscious that Freud taught us to decipher. Each signal reveals an internal struggle between conflicting desires, primitive fears, and defense mechanisms operating below the threshold of awareness. The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you use it to judge others or to better understand yourself? Because the deepest truth of all is that these mechanisms live within each of us. If this video opened your eyes to dynamics you had never considered, write your city in the comments below and hit that like button if this resonated with you in any way.